Revelations that will send shivers down your spine await you. How did the infant god Hermes, as a mere 6-hour-old baby, manage to outsmart Apollo himself? What connects stolen sacred cows, snoring in unison, to an ancient security system based on music? Are you ready to discover that one of these cows was actually a goat, and that this was not just a joke, but a key moment leading to an incredible deal between the brother gods? You'll hear about the lyre, born from a tortoise shell and cowgut strings, about musical horns, about flutes made of reeds and mischief, and how these very cows became living instruments capable of performing harmonious melodies. Stories await you of how the gods, striving for order, found inspiration in pure chaos, and how cooperation was born out of rivalry, which gave birth to music that resounds through the ages. We will touch on the darkest and most intriguing facets of this legend: how one theft turned into a symphony, how creativity was born from conflict, and how even the most ridiculous ideas can become an eternal melody. Stay with us, because the most magical, shocking, and incredible part of this story is just beginning. Something awaits you that will turn your understanding of myths, music, and divine mischief upside down. That night, the moon illuminated the valley, bathing it in an ethereal light. Footsteps on the dewy grass sounded softly, like echoes of a distant lullaby. Approaching the crest of the hill, you find yourself before 50 cows. They were not grazing, but rather resting, enveloped in slumber. Only a few slowly circled, and one, with surprising grace, tried to scratch its ear. But the main thing that attracted attention was the sound. These cows weren't just moving, they seemed to resonate. Their mooing was tuned, deliberate. Each sound vibrated a little longer than it should have, like a string that continues to sound after being touched. It seemed to you that one of them was mooing in perfect fifths, and when they all mooed together, it was not a simple neighborhood singing, but a deep, hypnotic chorale echoing through the hills. Sleepy, deep, slightly disturbing. Apollo, god of music and light, apparently thought, "You know what? My cows need harmony." But that was just the beginning. The strangest thing started next. Apollo's cows began to snore. Not just breathe heavily, but emit full, deep, slow snores. You ducked behind a thyme bush and listened. Their nostrils flared and contracted like old bellows. The sound was melodic. Not beautiful, not unpleasant, just strangely structured, as if each cow had been trained with a metronome. One rolled onto its side, another took a deep breath. You almost expected them to turn over in unison. You sat down. There was something mesmerizing about this moment. A whole divine herd in the middle of its mystical cycle. Some quietly slumbered, dreaming of sacred fields. Others twitched, as if replaying divine bovine memories in their minds. You wondered if they dreamed of grasses that sang in response when they chewed them, or if they dreamed at all. And then you noticed the smallest cow twitch its ears. And there it was, a ringing sound, soft and distant, barely audible, like a light chime. But there were no bells on any of the cows. You squinted. The sound seemed to be coming from the cow's horn. Historians still debate whether this moment of myth was symbolic or literal. Did Apollo's cows really have magical horns that rang when they moved? Or was it a poetic embellishment written by some bored monk trying not to fall asleep in the scriptorium? According to the most ancient hymns, yes, it's a real thing. And yes, it's one of the most sleepily soothing hymns. Apollo's cows were stolen, shortly after they appeared in myths. But before the theft, they simply mooed, grazed, slept, and snored. The sacred herd lived in the region of Pieria or Thessaly, depending on which ancient GPS you trust. They were known more for their symbolic value than for their practical usefulness. No one milked them. No one turned them into divine cheeseburgers. They were celestial livestock, which in true Greek style meant they were to be stolen almost immediately. But before all that drama, that was their life. They dozed on a hill, guarded only by their strange musical biology. And yes, if you're wondering, there are sources suggesting that Apollo didn't even invent the security system. Some extreme interpretations claim that the cows developed it themselves, as a species adaptation to divine theft, a kind of ancient bovine evolutionary alarm clock. Even stranger, there is a small fragment of Orphic text claiming that all the cows were born from the stars and descended to Earth during an eclipse. The theory didn't catch on, probably because even by mythological standards, interstellar cowfall was a bit much. But the snoring, that stuck. Ancient travelers reportedly described it in temple inscriptions, usually right after more serious prayers. "O Phoebus Apollo, bring the harvest, and please tell your cows to be quieter after midnight." And if you're asking if anyone ever tried to ride one of these divine cows, well, there's an Etruscan fresco showing a very determined-looking demigod trying to do just that. His face says regret. The cow's face says moo in D minor. Nevertheless, it's impossible not to feel relaxed. The sound was rhythmic, almost metronomic. The herd breathed in unison. Even the stars overhead seemed to pulse in their sleepy tempo. Somewhere nearby, a night breeze stirred the strings of a harp. Or maybe it was another cow, yawning in E-flat. And just when you felt yourself sinking into the herd's breathing rhythm, there was a rustling in the trees. Someone or something was watching the cows and planning something mischievous. But for now, you remained hidden in the grass, lulled by sacred snores and a celestial cow lullaby. You shifted slightly in the grass, trying not to break a branch or disrupt the sleepy flow that had taken over the meadow. Ahead, the cows continued their cosmic snoring concert, as if Apollo had tuned them to a slow metronome, inhaling and exhaling. But at the edge of the forest, there, between two olive trees, you noticed movement. It wasn't a wolf, not a mortal thief, not even a nymph looking for a picnic spot. No, it was a child. A divine child, to be precise, which is always dangerous. This wasn't just any divine infant. It was Hermes, the future messenger of the gods, patron of mischief, inventions, travel, and commerce. But right now, he was 6 hours old, and he was already crawling towards Apollo's sacred herd with an expression that said, "Let's create problems intentionally." Born in a cave in Arcadia to the nymph Maya, Hermes wasted no time acting as a full-fledged engine of chaos. According to ancient myth, and we're not even exaggerating here, he slipped out of his swaddling clothes, crawled outside, and decided that the best use of his first day was to steal cows, as one usually does. The forest held its breath as the infant god stepped onto the grass, dragging with him a pile of strangely bent sticks, vines, and an empty tortoise shell, like a heist kit for toddlers. And somehow it was. Historians still debate whether Hermes' divine status gave him fully developed reasoning skills at birth, or whether he was acting solely on pure chaotic instinct. Either way, no one expected a baby to outsmart Apollo, especially Apollo, who was literally the god of foresight. A bit embarrassing. You watch as Hermes examines the cows, like a little scientist. He observes their snores. He taps a hoof experimentally. One of the cows makes a gentle moo and shifts to the left. Hermes nods. Science achieved. Then, oh yes, he smiles. It's the kind of smile that makes you want to lock up the cookie jar and check your wallet. There is a minor myth that says Hermes originally wanted one cow as a pet. But as he toddled into the herd, he was struck by how plush, mooey, and generally fantastic they were. And like any kid in the stuffed animal aisle, he decided he needed all of them. But stealing cows, even sacred ones, isn't a quick grab and go. So Hermes improvised. First, he crafted a pair of baby sandals from bark and reeds. Then he flipped them, wore them backward. Why? To make the footprints look like they were going toward the herd, not away from it. A veritable infant with a working grasp of forensic distraction. The backward footprint detail comes from the Homeric hymn to Hermes, and it's still one of the most delightful pieces of divine mischief in Greek lore. Scholars love to debate whether it was a deliberate commentary on Hermes as the god of both thieves and trickery, or just a literary joke inserted by some smirking poet. You watch, stunned and vaguely horrified, as Hermes, who still has diaper crease marks on his forehead, somehow herds 50 cows without a whip, rope, or opposable thumbs. He whistles, hums, hops on one foot. The cows, surprisingly docile, just follow him. Some later writers suggest that Hermes may have had a pre-existing mild control over animals. Others suggest that the cows were so accustomed to boredom that anything remotely interesting, like a baby dancing in the moonlight, seemed worth following. One cow, however, resists. A big one, possibly named Bronze Horn, depending on the translation. Bronze Horn looks at the infant god with an expression of noble suspicion. Hermes puffs out his chest, puts both hands on his hips, and makes a squeak that might be a divine threat, or just a hiccup. Bronzehorn is unimpressed. And then, you won't believe it, Hermes offers her a song. From his pile of stolen items, he pulls out the tortoise shell. Earlier that day, he apparently cleaned it out, stretched cow guts across it like strings, and invented the lyre because, again, infant god. Hermes plucks a few notes. They float through the air like sleepy soap bubbles. Bronzehorn's ears twitch. Then the cow lowers her head and joins the herd, bribed with music. You've seen it all. Side note of obscure detail. Some little-known texts claim that the lyre was actually invented during Hermes' herding of the cows, not before, that he used the cows' own musical vibrations to understand pitch. This has led to some strange reenactments at modern festivals that we won't get into, but trust us, it involves cowbells, yoga pants, and a disturbing amount of pumpkins. As Hermes leads the herd into the woods, you marvel at how easily he navigates in the moonlight. No flashlight, no divine GPS, just vibes. You might be wondering, why is he doing this? What's the point? Well, Hermes is a newborn. Motivation at that age is less about logic, more about chaotic impulse. But the myth tells us that he planned to offer the cows as tribute to impress the other gods. Or maybe just to prank Apollo, because older brothers are always annoying, even when they're sun gods. Whatever the motive, Hermes succeeds. He vanishes into the forest with 50 snoring, mooing sacred cows, leaving behind only backward footprints, a faint musical echo, and one very confused pasture. And you, lying there under the stars, can only whisper to yourself, This kid is going to create so much bureaucracy. You're still lying in the grass, trying to make sense of what just happened. Somewhere in the distance, the last echo of a bovine yawn, or was it a note, fades into the trees. The herd is gone. Hermes, the newborn bandit, has absconded into the Arcadian night with Apollo's most prized possessions. You slowly stand up, brushing time leaves from your elbows, and look toward the trees where the infant god disappeared. The crescent moon glints on a hoofprint, backward of course, as if the cows were walking toward the meadow, not away from it. It's such a clever trick that you can't help but giggle, which feels wrong in this sleepy place. The snoring chorus has ended, replaced by an unsettling silence. The grass is still matted in cozy cow shapes, and a faint warm trace remains on the soil where bronze horn once lay. Now, of course, you're wondering how long it will take Apollo to notice. Spoiler alert, not long. You imagine him waking up in a golden villa, sunbeams curling around the windows like obedient pets. He probably yawns, stretches, plucks a few harp strings, and opens the stall door, only to find it completely empty. 50 sacred cows vanished. Apollo isn't known for his calm under pressure. Remember, this is the same god who once turned a guy into a dolphin for a mild annoyance. There's a delightful bit of ancient literary drama in how Apollo reacts. No divine lightning bolt, no instant vengeance. Instead, he does something almost human. He investigates. He crouches down like a suburban dad whose collection of garden gnomes has just been stolen. He examines the ground. He frowns. Footprints. But they are, of course, backward, as if the cows had walked to the meadow, not away. Historians still debate whether Apollo fell for the trick, or if he was simply playing along, formulating his next move. Some argue that he suspected Hermes immediately. Others think he was briefly stumped and tried to blame, I don't know, Hera, or maybe raccoons. Whatever the case, what we know from the Homeric hymn is that Apollo immediately set off on the trail, and though it pointed in the wrong direction, it led him somewhere. You begin to follow in his footsteps, technically, backward footsteps, into the woods. It's darker here, the thick branches overhead overlapping in a canopy, like sleepy sentinels. Laurel leaves brush your shoulders. Somewhere to your left, a night bird hoots slowly and off-key. You almost expect it to moo. It doesn't take long until the path splits. One side curves toward Mount Silene, Hermes' birthplace. The other spirals deeper into the woods, full of legends of goat-footed satyrs and nymphs with questionable musical tastes. Apollo pauses. You pause too. And then, like a bloodhound on the scent, he chooses the mountain trail. He goes slowly. The terrain becomes rocky, and thorny vines snag at your ankles. You duck beneath a pine branch, nearly stumbling over a root, and finally reach a high ledge. Below, a cave, looking cozy if you're into mossy ceilings and glowing mushrooms. Inside, lying like the world's most suspicious burrito, is Hermes. Yes, back in his swaddling clothes. Small, innocent, faking a snore. It's an Oscar-worthy performance. His eyes flicker closed, fingers twitch as if he's dreaming of inventing algebra. Apollo glares down at him. The scene is tense. God of light versus God of lies. Then Apollo says something like, "Cut the crap, I know what you did." To which Hermes, without opening his eyes, allegedly replies, "I've never seen a cow in my life." The sheer audacity. Local law adds strange flourishes here. One suggests Hermes, in turn, accused Apollo himself of stealing the cows and pinning the blame. Another says Hermes loudly farted and pretended to fall back asleep. Historians still debate whether these were actual oral traditions or ancient fanfics passed around in amphitheaters for laughs. But what we know is Apollo was not amused. He scoops up Hermes, swaddling clothes and all, and hauls him off to Olympus to face Zeus. Because when your brother steals your cattle, you call Dad. You now go with them in your dreamlike glide, as Apollo marches through Olympus's cloud gates, carrying what is essentially a smirking baby burrito. Other gods cast glances over their wine goblets. Hera raises an eyebrow. Ares chokes on a grape. Center stage sits Zeus, king of the gods, Thunder Dad, lover of drama. And you know what? Zeus laughs. It's that "here we go again" kind of laugh. You get the feeling Hermes has probably been causing trouble since before he was born. Zeus listens to Apollo's complaints. He looks at Hermes. He hears the infant god try to blame wild turtles and a strong breeze. He sighs. He probably wants a nap. So he does what most tired parents do when their kids bicker over something absurd. He tells them to work it out themselves. And so Apollo and Hermes, sun god and milky trickster, stand awkwardly in the clouds, trying to negotiate like two toddlers in a sandbox. Only one's holding a lyre, and the other has cow slobber on his chin. Back on Earth, the meadow is quiet once more. The stars lazily twinkle. Somewhere, a single cowbell jingles, perhaps a cow settling into a new pasture, unaware its existence has become divine courtroom evidence. You lie back in the grass, smiling, because the story isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. You drift after them, Apollo with his gold cloak slightly rumpled with stress. Hermes, wrapped like a cinnamon roll of mischief, as they descend from Olympus to settle the great divine cow incident. Zeus, having declared, "Work it out," leans back on his throne with the air of a man who knows he'll be hearing about this again in 12 hours, probably during ambrosia brunch. Back on Earth, Apollo wants two things: his cows back and maybe a little brother who doesn't steal in his sleep. Hermes, meanwhile, is focused on coming up with increasingly creative excuses and, oh yeah, perfecting his new toy. Because, yes, to somehow double down on his "I definitely didn't steal anything," Hermes has now brought along a lyre. He's casually strumming it like a bard in a wine bar, despite being, half a day old. The music is beautiful. You don't expect it to be. Not from someone who was literally born yesterday. But as Hermes plays, the air seems to still, birds quiet. Clouds slowly roll into softer shapes. Even Apollo's clenched fists loosen a little. It's a lyre, a brand new invention Hermes made from that tortoise shell, strings from dried cow gut, and held together with sheer divine chutzpah. According to myth, Hermes created it in the few hours before the cattle heist. So, not only is he a thief, but a composer with a flair for dramatic timing. Historians still debate whether Hermes really invented the lyre himself, or if that detail was added later to cast him as more than just a bovine abductor. Either way, what he's doing right now is kind of genius. The sound pouring out of the lyre is gentle, hypnotic, like cows snoring in a meadow, but arranged into chords that loosen your shoulders. Apollo, for all his anger, is listening. For a moment, the god of light looks like he might cry. And then Hermes sings. Yes, sings in perfect hexameter about how he definitely didn't steal the cows. And it's all a big misunderstanding. And isn't he just such a cute, innocent baby with great taste in music? You almost admire his audacity. Apollo isn't fooled. but he is moved. They stand there silently for a moment, as the last note of Hermes' lullaby ripples through the air, like a silk scarf tossed from a balcony. Then Apollo does something that surprises even you. He makes an offer. "I'll forgive the theft," he says, "if you give me that lyre." Now for context, Apollo is the god of music. He has harps, flutes, choirs, a posse of 9 muses, and complete dominion over song, poetry, and possibly musical festivals. For him to want Hermes' clunky little turtle guitar is a big deal. Hermes doesn't hesitate. He hands it over like a pro, possibly because he already has ideas for 5 new instruments and 3 business ventures. This moment, this musical transaction, is often framed as the first act of genuine diplomacy in Greek myth. Not just punishment or revenge, but real compromise. One god gets music, the other keeps his freedom. And the cows? Well, let's get to that. As they walk back toward where the stolen herd is hidden, you pass through a grove of whispering trees, leaves brushing you softly like a sleepy applause. The cows are there, lounging in a forest clearing, mostly unbothered. Some are chewing slowly. One seems to be sitting on a stump, as if conducting a silent orchestra. As soon as Apollo enters, the cows start to moo. It's almost imperceptible, just the faintest hint of recognition. You feel it in your chest, like a warm inner sigh. That's when Hermes makes another gesture. He offers Apollo a reed flute, a completely different instrument. "Try this," he says, grinning. "It's great for napping." This will eventually evolve into the pan flute and several other mythical sleep inducers. But for now, it's just another charm from the world's youngest trickster. There's a delightful minor detail from a lesser-known fragment of Hesiod's work. According to some accounts, the cows mooed in harmony when Apollo first played the lyre, like a moo choir, sacred bovine chants sung in 7-part polyphony. Modern scholars are divided. Was this poetic exaggeration, a joke, a symbolic melding of natural order and divine creation? Or did a bunch of ancient people actually believe cows could sing? Historians still debate whether it was meant to mark the moment divine music officially entered the world, or just a funny add-on to make Hermes look even cleverer. Either way, it worked. Apollo forgives Hermes. The cows are returned. And the lyre, the very first lyre, is now a sacred symbol of Apollo's domain. Back in the meadow where it all began, the herd gathers again like a choir returning to its green concert hall of snores. They arrange themselves with the practiced grace of veteran napping champions. You see Bronzehorn lift its head and let out a single lowing note, like a tuning fork setting the tone. And so, the world is restored, sort of. Because, spoiler alert, Hermes isn't done yet. Not by a long shot. But for now, you lie with your hands behind your head, listening as Apollo strums the lyre with ease. Divine fingers dance over the strings of cowgut and charm. Each note resonates in the meadow like a lullaby from the gods themselves. And the cows, they're clearly loving it. Some are lazily tapping their hooves. One seems to be swaying from side to side. You swear Bronzehorn just mooed a minor chord. But something still bothers Apollo. You can see it in the way he tunes and retunes the lyre. The music is perfect, obviously, but it's not enough. He's still thinking about the theft. Not angrily, not anymore, just curiously. How did a brand new god, born 12 hours ago, pull off such an elaborate heist that included reverse tracks, musical misdirection, and an impromptu hexameter-based musical performance? You watch as Apollo surveys the land again. Even now, the reverse hoofprints mock him from the soil. This wasn't just any prank. It was a statement. It's at this moment that Apollo has a divine epiphany, which often comes when you are lying in a meadow full of snoring sacred cows. If infant Hermes could do this, what else could he be capable of? Some myths suggest that it was at this moment Apollo became low-key impressed by his baby brother. Not pleased, of course, but intrigued. Historians still debate whether Apollo ever fully trusted Hermes after this day, or if their relationship was always built on a mixture of respect and constant well-managed suspicion. Like roommates who both label their hummus and occasionally steal each other's socks. But back to the cows. Now that they're safely returned, Apollo does what any self-respecting god would do. He upgrades security. You see him pluck a reed from a nearby stream, twist it into a spiral, and start doing something to it. In moments, it's no longer just a reed, it's a whistle. But not just any whistle. It's one that makes different notes depending on which cow hears it. You heard that right? This, according to some fringe versions of the myth, was the beginning of what's now jokingly referred to as the Apollo's Cow Recognition System, a form of early biometric identification, but based on sound. Apollo, god of logic and patterns, figured that if Hermes could outsmart tracks, the next lock needed to be based on music. From a modern perspective, it's absurd. From a mythological one, strangely plausible. As Apollo moves through the herd, he tests his system. Bronzehorn responds to F-sharp. A smaller cow only recognizes a descending trill. One particularly sleepy cow only acknowledges a glissando that you're pretty sure sounds like a musical sneeze. The cows move softly in response, as if enjoying being known. Apollo smiles. This is no longer just security. It's a kind of harmony, a relationship between keeper and herd, musician and muse. He plays, they respond. He plucks, they shift. You're witnessing the world's first example of musical cattle management. It's all very bucolic, but not everyone is convinced. On the far side of the field, you spot a minor goddess squinting from behind a bush. She's scribbling something on a papyrus scroll and muttering, "Overkill RE, cows." You can't be sure, but she's possibly a Hera intern. God's gossip. It happens. Meanwhile, Hermes is off somewhere again. He's now standing ankle-deep in the stream, skipping stones at precise intervals. Inventing a primitive metronome? Possibly. Or maybe he's just splashing around for fun. With Hermes, it's hard to tell. Apollo, however, is in full musical geek mode. He's even started adding musical bells to the cow's horns. Yes, actual bells. You hear a faint jingle as a cow shakes its head. Another tries to scratch its ear and accidentally plays a 3-note arpeggio. You can't help but smile. Apollo is essentially turning his herd into a walking, mooing music box. Minor detail. One ancient commentator claims Apollo eventually arranged the cows into a kind of mobile sound sculpture. They wandered through groves and vineyards, their bells tuned to reverberate off marble and create pleasing effects for anyone nearby. A divine playlist on hooves. More skeptical historians have called this a pastoral exaggeration, but they still admit the idea of a musical security system is charmingly in character for Apollo. Even more interestingly, some scholars think stories like these had real-world significance. They helped explain why certain sacred animals were given elaborate decorations, treated with uncanny reverence, or kept from being eaten, especially when temple records needed to justify their food budgets. Imagine a priest telling his flock, "No, we can't sacrifice that cow. She's in C major, and we have a ceremony tomorrow." So you lie there, hands behind your head, listening to Apollo's first musical cattle test. He plays a scale. The cows respond in turn. It's not perfect, but it's serene. There's one cow who's consistently half a beat behind, but even that has a kind of sleepy charm. You glance up at the stars, twinkling softly overhead, like audience members nodding in approval. And just when you feel yourself drifting off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of moos and string vibrations, a sudden loud, discordant clang rips through the meadow. The cows all freeze. Apollo stands up. You sit up. The clang came from a cow that wasn't part of the herd. It had a stolen bell. It had blotches of paint on its side. And worst of all, it's actually a goat. A goat in cow cosplay. Apollo stares. Hermes, smirking from behind a bush, gives a thumbs up. You bury your face in your hands. This is going to get complicated again. You blink a few times, trying to process what you're seeing in the moonlight. A goat, clumsily painted with blotchy cow spots, wearing a makeshift bell that clangs a little too shrilly for Apollo's perfectly tuned herd. It stands there proudly, chewing on something, possibly a parchment of Olympian tax records, and bleats with such confident awfulness that the cows all shift uncomfortably. Apollo doesn't move. He just stares at it. His golden brow furrows with the force of 1,000 overtures. You can almost see the internal monologue. Pretend I didn't see that, or invent a whole new category of divine retribution. And then, a small voice calls out from behind the bush, "I thought you'd appreciate the test sample." It's Hermes again. He steps into the clearing barefoot and utterly unrepentant. In one hand, he's holding the lyre, and in the other, what looks like a canned honey. Don't ask about the honey. You are not ready. Apollo exhales sharply. This time, not from anger, but from pure disbelief. "You put a goat with my cows." Hermes shrugs. It had the right attitude. You almost choke on your own laughter. One of the cows, clearly unimpressed by the imposter, gently nudges the goat with its shoulder. The goat stumbles, recovers with a dramatic flourish, and strikes a pose that says, "I belong here." Minor texts suggest this wasn't the first time Hermes had pulled such a trick. One particularly obscure papyrus implies he once entered a divine livestock competition by disguising a donkey as a dish, with breadsticks shaped like horns glued to its head. It took second place. Historians still debate whether these stories were cautionary tales or ancient comedic skits passed down by temple storytellers trying to liven up long festivals. Either way, it's clear that Hermes didn't believe in boredom. Apollo, to his credit, doesn't summon a sunbeam of retribution. Instead, he sits down, plucks a calm note on his lyre, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "I'm going to regret not giving you a blast." But here's the rub. Hermes actually has an argument. He kneels next to the goat, who is now sprawled out like it owns the place, and begins to explain. "You see, the bells worked. You noticed something was wrong because of the music." Apollo raises an eyebrow. Hermes continues. "If the harmony is disrupted, the system flags it. It's genius theft detection. You should be thanking me." You look around. The cows are now quiet, observing. Some are slowly chewing. Others are looking from Apollo to Hermes like they're watching a tennis match in divine slow motion. Apollo considers it. This is how the gods work, you remind yourself. It's not about the theft. It's about the lesson. And in such an absurdly clever way, Hermes actually proved that Apollo's new musical cowbell system is pretty robust. After all, not even a goat could fool it. There's a pause, and then Apollo, with a sigh that sounds like a softly strummed harp of resignation, says, "Fine, but get that goat out of here before I compose a lament in its honor." Hermes nods, grinning. He lets out a small whistle, and the goat wanders off, probably to start a jazz trio somewhere in thievery. As peace returns to the meadow, Apollo retunes his lyre. It's his lyre now. He plucks a few new notes, soft ones that ripple through the grass like silk. You close your eyes for a moment and let it sink in. This is the real magic. Not the cows, not the goat, not even the trickery. It's the music. Because from this moment on, Apollo and Hermes are forever linked. Not just through their little musical cow espionage incident, but through their shared instruments, their strangely compatible talents, and a mutual understanding that gods don't always need to punish. Sometimes they just need a new chord. As Apollo plays, the cows begin to move again, forming slow, sleepy circles. The bells, all perfectly tuned now, begin to chime softly in time with his music. The sound is hypnotic, layered, and warm. You swear you can hear harmonies from the clouds. This moment would become the foundation for sacred festival reenactments centuries later. Priests of Apollo would strap tiny lyres to calves and pretend they could sing during processions. One Roman poet claimed to have witnessed a bull bellowing in perfect pentameter. Others were less impressed. One Greek philosopher wrote bitterly, "The cows in my town only moo when they're hungry. There is no poetry in indigestion." But the myth endured because people seemed to want their gods to make music with cows. It was charming, it was funny, and it made them feel like even the cosmos had a sense of humor. As night deepens and the music drifts up to the stars, you lie back and look up. The moon is a perfect crescent, like the smile of someone who knows the punchline to a joke you haven't heard yet. You yawn. A cow standing nearby mirrors the gesture. Its bell gives a quiet, perfect E. And somewhere, just barely audible, Hermes is already testing a new instrument made of reeds, cat bones, and pure chutzpah. You can't wait. You wake up. Well, not exactly wake up, but drift back to a lighter layer of sleep. As the sound of hooves shuffles through the meadow, the cows rearrange themselves like a slow-moving string section before a concert. One nudges another, who emits a low, sleepy moo that accidentally harmonizes with the faint strumming of Apollo's lyre. You're not surprised anymore. The cows have impeccable timing. Apollo sits nearby, focused, adding what appears to be a tuning peg to one of the cow's horns. He hums as he works, occasionally pulling more delicate pieces of string and bone from a small pouch. At this point, you're no longer sure where Apollo ends and the mythological musical ecosystem begins. But just when everything seems to be settling down again, a familiar rustle cuts through the olive grove behind you. It's Hermes. Of course it is. Only this time, he's carrying a scroll and wearing sandals that jingle. The jingle is important because it means he has officially entered his era as a messenger god. He steps into the clearing with the unflappable energy of someone who knows he won't be punished for anything. Zeus wants a report. He's calling it the musical miracle incident. Apollo doesn't look up. Tell him it's resolved. I could do that, or I could tell him about the goat. Apollo glares. Hermes wiggles his eyebrows. There's a pause, and then Apollo sighs again, his new favorite expression and points to the largest cow, bronze horn, recorded, official representative of the herd. You watch as an infant god dictates to the god of the sun while a cow listens. That's what a bedtime story does to you. Historians still debate whether this divine field report actually happened, or if it was later added by poetic dramatists to explain why so many ancient scrolls refer to bronze horn as a witness to celestial agreements. Either way, bronze horn's name shows up in more mythological minor texts than you'd expect for a non-speaking participant. Hermes scribbles down the account quickly, with flair, inventing 3 new abbreviations along the way. I'm also adding a clause about my flute, he says, just so you know. Apollo looks at him suspiciously. What flute? Hermes grins and pulls a strange little instrument made of reeds and twine from behind his back. This one, he says, and blows a few experimental notes. The sound that comes out is not good. It wavers, it falters. It sounds like a sleepy duck trying to sing opera in a well. But then, miraculously, a cow turns its head. Another blinks and perks up its ears. A third, very slowly, gets to its feet and begins a languid march toward the noise. You watch as more cows slowly gather in a tight circle around Hermes. Some yawn, one drools a little, all of them somehow lulled by the dissonant lullaby of this newest invention. A minor myth claims that Hermes would later refine this instrument to such precision that it could put people to sleep in seconds. An early prototype of the panic pipe he would later use to calm mortals during plagues, famines, and poetry slams. You have to admit, it's working. Even you feel a little heavier, like the breath rhythm of the flute is nesting somewhere behind your eyes. But Apollo is not impressed. You're turning them into zombies. I'm increasing productivity, faster grazing, longer sleeps, higher milk output. But wait, they're giving milk? Apollo just stares. Historians still debate whether this interaction was meant to reflect agricultural innovations in ancient Greece, or simply to dramatize Hermes's relentless need to be the founder of a divine gadget startup. You, meanwhile, lean back and let the sound wash over you. The lyre hums, the flute whistles, the bells chime softly, like distant wind chimes, on the porch of Olympus. And that's when you realize something very sweet. These 2 gods, Apollo and Hermes, are starting to work in tandem. Apollo adjusts a cowbell's pitch. Hermes responds by changing the angle of the flute's reed. They say little, but their movements are synchronized. One tunes, the other tests. One strums, the other improvises. The meadow has become a studio. The cows are the instruments. It's strange, beautiful, and a little bit ridiculous. But most sacred myths are. And so you lie, sprawled in the clover, witnessing a collaboration that would be immortalized centuries later in temple frescoes, lullabies, and poorly carved clay figurines sold at festival stands. 2 gods, 1 herd, an endless moo. Just before your eyes close, you hear one last exchange. Apollo, adjusting a stubborn bell, mutters, "You'll never top this." Hermes, already halfway to assembling a second flute out of a discarded fig branch, grins. "Give me a day." The meadow settled into a sort of divine cradle, as if the music had threaded a warm blanket onto every leaf, bell, and hoof. You shift slightly, not wanting to break the rhythm of this strange, sleepy orchestra. Overhead, the stars seem to lean in to listen, twinkling in unison with bronze horn's exhalation. Apollo's new flute is still in Hermes's hand, but it has evolved. Over the last few minutes, maybe longer. Hermes has reworked the reed system, incorporating a twist of olive bark and a tiny pebble that rattles inside the mouthpiece like a soft maraca. He's calling it the doze pipe. It hums rather than whistles. Now, you would be skeptical, but 3 cows have just simultaneously laid down, like marionettes whose strings have been cut in time to the chorus. Too efficient, Apollo mutters, frowning. They'll be asleep until sunrise. Happy to help. Hermes grins, tilting the flute like a bartender showing off a new cocktail. I just invented both music and mass bovine sedation. It's productivity. The nearest cow lets out a snort, one that sounds like agreement, or maybe a dream about grass. Myth fantasy, folks. Yes, they exist. Love this part of the legend. They say Hermes' invention of sleep music marks the beginning of formal sleep rituals in Greek temples, where certain notes were believed to induce visions. In some surviving fragments, priests even describe the dreams of herds, where entire groups of cattle were believed to share a single vision inspired by the celestial song. Historians still debate whether these accounts were rooted in ritual or simply a poetic explanation for why cows sometimes sleep in very organized spirals. Apollo, still skeptical, takes the doze pipe from Hermes and tries it out. He plays a short, simple tune, 5 soft notes in a descending arc, a sort of sleepy sigh made audible. It doesn't just work on the cows, it works on you. The air itself seems heavier, like velvet soaked in starlight. Each note unfurls through your body like a warm bath. You feel the tension leaving your joints, your thoughts unspooling into long, aimless lines. There's no need to do or be anything other than hear. You catch Apollo's eye. Yes, he gives a quick glance, and in that flicker you see something unusual for a god of radiant perfection. Approval of the music, of the moment, perhaps even of his younger brother. This is the moment that mythographers like to highlight when discussing divine character arcs in Greek mythology. Apollo, whose domain includes truth, order, and prophecy, isn't always the most flexible personality. And yet, here he is, embracing an invention born of chaos, theft, and bovine pretense. This moment, mythographers say, marks the beginning of Apollo's recognition of improvisation, of rhythm that isn't always perfect, of harmony found in unexpected places, like in the breath of a sleepy cow, or the strum of a lyre strung with stolen sinew. The gods aren't alone anymore either. A few minor deities have arrived to investigate the musical meadow they've heard whispered on the wind. You spot a dryad peeking from a fig tree. A river nymph emerges, wringing water from her hair. One satyr creeps in with suspicious stealth, only to immediately trip over a cow and fall instantly asleep. Hermes claps once, delighted. It's contagious. Apollo doesn't even argue. In fact, he sits down, dusts off his robes, and gestures to Hermes. Let's formalize this. You tilt your head. Formalize what? Hermes seems to understand instantly. He nods and starts carving something into the bark of a nearby tree. You get up and move closer, watching as the writing takes shape. Divine sheet music carved in ancient symbols, a musical agreement, a pact of invention, of artistry, and perhaps a few unspoken rules about bovine chutzpah. These are the first divine collaboration agreements. They roughly say, let it be known that melody can be born of mischief. Let those who steal also give. Let harmony bloom from hooves and humor. Bronzehorn moves solemnly. The nymphs applaud. Even the tree seems pleased. Apollo adds his touch, a golden sunbeam at the base of the carving. Hermes, not to be outdone, sketches in a pair of winged sandals and a very smug-looking turtle. You can't help but smile. This unlikely partnership, this duo of order and rebellion, has created something lasting. Not just instruments, not just systems, but a blueprint for divine play. A reminder that sometimes the most sacred things are born from chaos and cows, especially cows. The meadow settles down again. The dryads retreat back into the trees. The satyr snores softly. The cows, lulled by the music into a sort of musical coma, lie in rhythmic rows. You lie down too, sinking into the grass as if it's a harp tuned to your heartbeat. Above you, the stars twinkle. Next to you, Hermes plays one last note on his new flute, a sound like laughter drifting to sleep, and then silence. Not the silence that demands attention, but the one that welcomes it. The night is heavy with silence, not empty, but a gentle fullness of things resting exactly where they're meant to be. You lie in the meadow, surrounded by cows shaped like musical phrases, each curled around the lulled into a visible lullaby. The grass is cool beneath you. The stars don't twinkle, but rather exhale. In the distance, Hermes is whittling a new flute, because of course he is. He's using a twig, the corner of a sandal, and what looks like a spare cowbell. That guy never stops. Apollo, meanwhile, is composing something in silence. His fingers move across his lyre soundlessly, as if he's rehearsing a song he hasn't yet decided to play. His eyes are distant, watching the clouds gather at the edges of the horizon. A breeze rolls through, bells jingle, the cows stir, and you sense something shifting. It's subtle, but it's there. The music is gathering to move on. Apollo rises and gazes at the sky, which is now starting to lighten at the edges with the first hints of morning. Hermes joins him, holding his new, questionably functional flute. They exchange a look, not quite a nod, not quite a challenge, more like a preparation for the next verse. And just like that, the meadow becomes a rehearsal hall. The cows are waking, stretching, and shaking off dew like shaggy musicians called to warm up. One emits a low moo that sounds distinctly like a tuning fork. Another produces a rhythmically perfect tail swish. Even Bronze Horn, ever the leader, stamps twice with a dignity that says, "Let's get this show on the road." Apollo raises his lyre. Hermes raises his flute. And then, wouldn't you know it, they begin. Not haphazardly, not fragmentarily, but with full orchestral coordination. You blink. The cows blink. A satyr, half snoring, chokes on his own snore in surprise. Because this isn't just music anymore. It's a performance. Apollo plucks a bright, clear string of notes that shimmer like morning dew on olive leaves. Hermes answers with a playful trill, light and winding. The cows, bless them, chime in with perfectly timed bell rings and low, melodic movements that anchor the whole composition. And somehow, it works. It's not a concert. It's a ceremony, a dawn made audible, a celebration of mischief and forgiveness, and the divine wonder of musical livestock. The notes rise and fall like breath. The rhythm is organic. The harmony, true harmony, not just in the music, but in the very collaboration. Apollo, the god of control and beauty. Hermes, the god of chaos and trickery. Together, creating something more than either could alone. Historians still debate whether this dawn concert actually took place, or if it was a metaphor used by bards to explain why Apollo's music was said to awaken the day. But traces of the story remain in mosaics, temple frescoes, even shards of pottery depicting lyres, flutes, and herds in synchronous formation. One little-known vase, now in fragments, depicts a goat-footed flutist named Hermes. Probably non-canonical, probably hilarious. You shift a bit in the grass, trying not to giggle. The nearest cow regards you with majestic slowness, then emits a moo that hits a perfectly executed D-flat. And just when the performance might reach its peak, Apollo adds vocals. It's not lyrics, nothing in the way of words, but a sound drawn from somewhere between breath and eternity. He sings long, rich vowels that make the air around you vibrate gently. Even the trees seem to lean in, even the birds waking from their usual morning squawks. And Hermes, he's backing him up, not perfectly, not always on key, but with soul. He takes Apollo's precision and answers it with play, teasing waves of sound that dance just ahead of the melody, like a cat twitching its tail at a sleeping dog. You can't tell if they're competing or collaborating. And maybe that's the point. The music builds, then stops. Not abruptly, not unpleasantly, just ends, like the last page of a book slowly closing. The cows freeze for a moment, then one lets out the most contented sigh you've ever heard from a quadruped. A chain reaction follows. Low moose of approval, the rustle of settling movement, a faint jingle of a tail-turned bell. You applaud softly, because anything louder would feel like sacrilege. Apollo bows. Hermes bows lower for the drama. Bronze horn, not to be outdone, inclines his head with a solemn bovine grace. You lie back again, and the meadow feels different now, as if a ritual has been completed, as if something unfathomable has been planted here, a seed of sound that will keep blooming again and again each morning. You sigh. You've just witnessed the divine equivalent of a jam session between order and chaos. You should be taking notes, but all you really want to do is stay here, in this strange, sleepy music garden, and maybe dream a bit more. And maybe you will, because even as the first slivers of light start to spill over the distant hills, you feel the softness of the night still clinging to the edges of your mind. The cows settle in again. Hermes tucks his flute behind his belt. Apollo lays his lyre down beside him like a pillow. And together, the gods lie in the grass, not as immortals, but simply as brothers, finally in unison. Dawn steals across the meadow now, touching everything with a soft golden rose dimming that makes even the most chaotic things feel gentle. The cowbells jingle less frequently, more like punctuation in a paragraph that's winding down. You stretch slightly, not enough to wake fully, just to drift into the next layer of sleep. You're not the only one. Apollo and Hermes are still lying in the grass, their silhouettes outlined by drowsy sunbeams. It's a rare thing in Greek mythology. Peace. No instructions, no curses, no chases involving angry satyrs or out-of-control winged sandals. Just two gods side by side, looking at the clouds and probably pretending they don't enjoy each other's company. Hermes is humming something. Not a melody from his flute or lyre, just a simple wordless tune. It sounds like something you'd hum while waiting for figs to ripen or for trouble to arrive. Because, of course, we're talking about Hermes, and boredom is not his natural state. Sure enough, after a pause of silence, he turns to Apollo and says, "So, what about expansion for the herd?" Apollo groans. "Don't do that." "He's got ideas," Hermes insists, sitting up. "Cross a cow with a swan. Make it fly. Put bells on the wings." "That's not how—" Apollo starts, then stops. "You know what? I'm not even going to ask." You can't help but smile. These two will never change. And maybe that's a good thing. Historians still debate whether Hermes ever sincerely wanted to settle into a decent godly job, or if he was just collecting titles like souvenirs, messenger of the gods, patron of thieves, inventor of startlingly loud goats. But this moment, of them lying beside Apollo in the sunlit meadow, is often cited as the beginning of Hermes' real integration into the Olympian family. See, it wasn't just the lyre that won him Apollo's forgiveness. It was the music, the shared music, that turned a punishment into a partnership. And Hermes knows this. You know, he says, propping himself up on his elbows, we could patent this. The Zabel system, musical identification, Hermolo harmonics, first godly enterprise. That's the worst name I've ever heard. And yet, Hermes says with a grin, you're writing it down. You glance over at Apollo's tablet. He absolutely is. Here, you realize, is the part of the myth that rarely gets attention. The aftermath, the bureaucracy of mythology. Because divine innovation always comes with administrative consequences. Apollo is drawing up new symbols, one for musical security, one for collaborative inventions, and one, somewhat reluctantly, for Hermes himself. The cowbells, once simple identifiers, are now sacred totems. In later myths, priests wore miniature versions as talismans to ward off thieves or to attract luck, depending on who you ask. Regional interpretations of ancient inscriptions suggest that Hermes' flute also found its way into minor healing rituals. Its strange drone was believed to relieve fevers and insomnia. More than one amphora fragment depicts a person curled up next to a flute, a cow, and a chunk of bread. A mythological starter pack, essentially. And that's the charm of it all. From absurdity came structure. From a stolen herd came music. From two quarreling gods came a kind of harmony the Greeks would write poems about for centuries. A soft rustling draws your attention back to the present. Hermes is standing up again, adjusting the strap of his bag. I should probably get going, he says. Deliver some dreams, maybe a couple of lies. Apollo raises an eyebrow. You're still on house arrest. Hermes grins. Not if I'm quick. And with that, he steps out and vanishes, just disappears into the morning mist, leaving behind a faint hint of mint and mischief. One cow sneezes, another flaps its ears in applause. Apollo doesn't look surprised. He just goes back to tuning his lyre. And you stay for a while longer because the meadow is still humming. Not loudly, just enough. There's a rhythm in the soil now, a slow heartbeat in the grass, a song that doesn't need to be played aloud to be heard. And as you sink back into that dimming, you realize something very sweet. The two gods, Apollo and Hermes, are starting to work in tandem. Apollo adjusts the pitch of a cowbell. Hermes responds by altering the angle of the flute's reed. They say little, but their movements are synchronized. One tunes, the other tests. One strums, the other improvises. The meadow has become a studio. The cows, instruments. It's strange, beautiful, and a little bit funny. But most sacred myths are. And so you lie, sprawled in the clover, witnessing a collaboration that will, centuries later, be immortalized in temple frescoes, lullabies, and badly carved clay figurines sold at festival stands. Two gods, one herd, an endless moo. Just before you close your eyes, you hear one last exchange. Apollo, adjusting a stubborn bell, mutters, "You'll never top that." Hermes, already halfway through assembling a second flute out of a discarded fig branch, grins, "Give me a day." The meadow had settled into a kind of divine cradle, as if the music had woven a warm blanket onto every leaf, bell, and hoof. You shift carefully, unwilling to disrupt the rhythm of this strange, sleepy orchestra. Overhead, the stars seem to be leaning in to listen, flickering in unison with bronze horn's exhalation. Apollo's new flute is still in Hermes' hand, but it's evolved. Over the past few minutes, maybe even longer, Hermes has reworked the reed system, incorporating a twist of olive bark and a tiny pebble that rattles inside the mouthpiece like a soft maraca. He's calling it the lull pipe. It hums rather than whistles. Now, you'd be skeptical, but 3 cows have just simultaneously laid down, like marionettes, whose strings have been cut to the beat of the chorus. Too efficient, Apollo mutters, frowning. They'll be awake before sunup? Happy to help. Hermes grins, tilting the flute like a bartender showcasing a new cocktail. I just invented both music and mass bovine sedation. That's productivity. The nearest cow gives a snort, one that sounds like agreement, or maybe a dream about grass. Fantasy mythologists, yes, they exist, love this part of the legend. They say that Hermes' invention of sleep music marks the beginning of formal sleep rituals in Greek temples, where certain notes were believed to induce visions. In some surviving fragments, priests even describe the dreams of herds, where entire groups of cattle were said to share a unified vision, inspired by the celestial song. Historians still debate whether these accounts were rooted in ritual or just a poetic explanation for why cows sometimes sleep in very organized spirals. Apollo, still skeptical, takes the lull pipe from Hermes and tries it. He plays a short, simple melody, 5 soft notes in a descending arc, a kind of sleepy sigh made audible. It works, not just on the cows, on you. The very air feels heavier, like velvet soaked in starlight. Each note winds through your body like a warm bath. You feel the tension leave your joints, your thoughts unraveling into long, aimless threads. There's no need to do or be anything other than hear. You catch Apollo's eye. Well, he casts a quick glance, and in that flicker, you see something unusual for a god of radiant perfection. Approval of the music, of the moment, maybe even of his younger brother. This is a moment that mythographers love to highlight when discussing divine character arcs in Greek mythology. Apollo, whose domain includes truth, order, and prophecy, isn't always the most flexible personality. And yet, here he is, embracing an invention born of chaos, theft, and bovine pretense. This moment, mythographers say, marks the beginning of Apollo's recognition of the improvisational, of the rhythm that isn't always perfect, the harmony found in unexpected places, like in the breath of a sleepy cow or the strum of a lyre strung with stolen tendons. Gods are no longer alone too. Several minor deities have arrived to investigate the musical meadow, which they were whispered about in the wind. You notice a dryad peeking out from a fig tree. A river nymph appears, wringing water from her hair. One satyr creeps forward with suspicious stealth, only to immediately trip over a cow and fall instantly asleep. Hermes claps once, delighted. It's contagious. Apollo doesn't even argue. In fact, he sits up, brushes off his robes, and gestures to Hermes. Let's formalize this. You tilt your head. Formalize what? Hermes seems to understand instantly. He nods and starts carving something into the bark of a nearby tree. You stand and move closer, watching as the writing takes shape. Divine jottings, carved in ancient symbols, a musical agreement, a pact of inventions, of art, and perhaps a few unspoken rules about bovine impudence. These are the first divine collaborative agreements. They roughly state, "Let it be known that melody can be born from mischief. Let those who steal also give back. Let harmony bloom from hooves and humor." The bronze horn moves solemnly. Nymphs applaud. Even the tree seems quite pleased. Apollo adds his touch, a golden sunbeam at the base of the carving. Hermes, not to be outdone, tosses over a pair of sandals and a very smug-looking tortoise. You can't help but smile. This unlikely partnership, this duet of order and rebellion, has created something lasting. Not just instruments, not just systems, but a blueprint for divine play. A reminder that sometimes the most sacred things are born from chaos and cows, especially cows. The meadow quiets again. Dryads retreat back into the trees. A satyr snores softly. The cows, lulled by the music into a kind of musical coma, lie in rhythmic rows. You lie too, sinking into the grass as if it were a harp, tuned to your heartbeat. Above you, the stars shimmer. Beside you, Hermes plays a final note on his new flute, a sound like laughter falling asleep, and then silence. Not the silence that demands attention, but the kind that welcomes it. The night is thick with quiet, not empty, but a tender fullness of things resting exactly where they're meant to be. You lie in the meadow, surrounded by cows shaped like musical phrases, each curled around itself like a visible lullaby. The grass is cool beneath you. The stars don't twinkle so much as exhale. In the distance, Hermes whittles a new flute, because of course he does. He's using a twig, a corner of a sandal, and what looks like a spare cowbell. That guy never stops. Apollo, meanwhile, is composing something in silence. His fingers move across his lyre soundlessly, as if he's practicing a song he hasn't decided to play yet. His eyes are distant, watching the clouds gathering at the edges of the horizon. A breeze rolls through. Bells jingle. The cows shift. And you realize that something is changing. It's subtle, but it's there. The music is gathering to move on. Apollo rises and looks at the sky, which is now beginning to lighten at the edges with the first hints of morning. Hermes joins him, holding his new, questionably functional flute. They exchange a look, not quite a nod, not quite a challenge, more like a preparation for the next verse. And just like that, the meadow becomes a rehearsal hall. The cows stir awake, stretching and shaking off dew like shaggy musicians called in for warm-up. One lets out a low moo that is distinctly in tune, like a tuning fork. Another executes a rhythmically perfect tail swish. Even the bronze horn, ever the leader, stamps twice with a dignity that says, "Let's get on with it." Apollo raises his lyre. Hermes raises his flute. And then, you won't believe it, they begin. Not randomly, not fragmentarily, but with full orchestral coordination. You blink. The cows blink. The satyr, halfway through a snore, chokes on his own snore in surprise. Because this isn't just music anymore. It's a performance. Apollo plucks a bright, clear string of notes that shimmer like morning dew on olive leaves. Hermes answers with a playful trill, light and winding. The cows, bless them, chime in with perfectly timed bell rings and low, melodic moos that anchor the whole composition. And somehow, it works. It's not a concert. It's a ceremony. The dawn made audible, a celebration of mischief and forgiveness, and the divine wonder of musical cattle. The notes rise and fall like breath. The rhythm is organic. The harmony, real harmony, not just in the music, but in the collaboration itself. Apollo, god of control and beauty. Hermes, god of chaos and trickery. Together, creating something more than either could create alone. Historians still debate whether this dawn concert actually happened, or whether it was a metaphor used by bards to explain why Apollo's music was said to wake the day. But traces of the story remain in mosaics, temple frescoes, even shards of pottery depicting lyres, flutes, and herds in synchronous formation. One obscure vase, now in fragments, depicts a goat flautist named Hermes, probably not canonical, probably hilarious. You shift slightly in the grass, trying not to giggle. The nearest cow looks at you with majestic slowness, then lets out a moo that hits a perfect demonstration of D-flat show-off. And just when the performance might be reaching its peak, Apollo adds vocals. Not lyrics, nothing in words, but a sound drawn from somewhere between breath and eternity. He sings long, rich vowel sounds that make the air around you vibrate gently. Even the trees seem to lean in. Even the birds, waking from their usual morning squawks. And Hermes, he's scatting along. Not perfectly, not always in tune, but with soul. He takes Apollo's precision and answers with play, teasing waves of sound that dance just ahead of the melody, like a cat twitching its tail at a sleeping dog. You can't tell if they're competing or collaborating. And maybe that's the point. The music builds, then fades. Not abruptly, not unpleasantly. It just ends, like the last page of a book closing slowly. The cows stand frozen for a moment. Then one lets out the most contented sigh you've ever heard from a quadruped. It's followed by a chain reaction. Low moos of approval, the rustle of peaceful movement, a faint jingle of a tail-turned bell. You applaud softly, because anything louder would feel like sacrilege. Apollo bows. Hermes bows. Lower for drama. The bronze horn, not to be outdone, inclines its head with solemn bovine grace.